I found out that I had hepatitis C in 1999. I was 19 years old. Back then I had been using drugs, so this news didn't surprise me that much. For me, it was like a rite of initiation that I successfully passed. In that time, hepatitis C was an incurable disease, and so both doctors and drug users believed that this is the end, my beautiful friend, as Jim Morrison said. To tell you the truth, I didn't feel much about this disease. For me, it was like a permission to continue using drugs. And of course, it was just a bravado. And I understood it only after I quit using and learned how to get clean. Approximately 10 years after I became infected with Hep C virus, I began to experience symptoms of this disease. They were loss of appetite, and even my favorite food tasted like junk. They were nausea or something like that. But most of all, it was this overwhelming sense of fatigue when I couldn't even get up from my bed in the morning to go to work. And for a while I thought it was like I had a clinical depression or something like that. The doctors decided that I needed treatment, and so they prescribed me standard interferon plus ribavirin. My therapy continued for 1 year, and during this time I had a lot of different side effects. For example, dermatitis, allergies on my legs when I scratched them till they began to bleed, and these bouts of rage when I shouted at my wife and baby daughter. Of course, I felt bad about this behavior, but it seemed like I couldn't do anything about it. I hope it was worth it in the end, because I was cured of hepatitis C. When I tested negative for Hep C virus, it felt as though a huge burden fell off my mind and body. I felt really re-energized and ready to take on the whole world. And maybe that's why I quit my job in the real estate agency and decided to engage in activism and to help other patients, because I had been there and I wanted to share my stories with them. And I have been sharing these stories since that time in front of different audiences. Government officials, doctors, patients, relatives, even law enforcement agencies. And of course, not everybody runs to help the patients after that. But I truly believe that little steps go a long way, and I will keep going.
Good morning. I am Adele Schwartz-Benzaken from Brazil, and it is my pleasure to co-share this section about financial and sustainability with a very polite French chair. So he's going to introduce himself.
Thank you. Actually, I'm the co-chair. Thanks for all of you, and my name is Dr. Philippe Dunnington. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of United. Thanks for all of you who attend, by the way, the side event we have. Just to remind us that why we are here, it's about finance. It's how to be realistic, ask for impossible, but make it happen. Very honored to be with Adele. It's really a privilege because, as we all know, not only the HIV program is really an example for the world, but I think that with the announcement of Brazil during this conference, I think they show us the future, and it's really inspiring. And I just want also to highlight what was said by Charles at the beginning of this session this morning. And I think that to have this approach, very pragmatic approach, linked to not only the program, but how to have option to finance, it's really something that is key. I hope that at the end of this session, you will have the view for each of you in your own country and with our support, not only United support, but the others, how to make this happen. So, Madame
We are going
Co-Chair.
to introduce the first speaker of this section, and it's my pleasure to introduce Homie, that I know that everybody knows him. But in Brazil, we have a pleasure to work with him in the past few months, and he's the director of the Center of Disease Analysis Foundation.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation to be here and thank the chairs for the opportunity to give you the analyses that we've done. What I'm going to talk about is how we go from economic analyses to a financial dialogue with the countries. And for those of you, for the two of you in the audience that may not know me, the CDA Foundation is a nonprofit. That the goal is to really accelerate hepatitis B and C elimination through data, modeling, intervention strategies, expanded access, and knowledge sharing. If you're familiar with the Polaris Observatory, you can go in there and all the data is open. You can look at what the burden is in about 100 countries, and then be able to look at also what it requires, what the countries need to do to achieve the WHO targets. As part of Polaris, for the last 3 years, we've been running economic analyses with different countries, and we've completed economic analyses for about 30 countries. And some of those have actually led to national strategies, and more recently, we formed the Global Procurement Fund, which is a fund similar to Global Fund, and I apologize for maybe confusing the audience saying that it's Global Fund. This is actually a separate fund, where it takes orders from negotiated prices with manufacturers based on large orders and can provide it to countries at very low cost, affordable, and WHOP qualified products. All right, so here are some of the countries that we work with. We actually have worked with close to 100 countries and to help them to really analyze the burden. And these are some of the countries that have actually utilized those analyses to really develop their national strategies. And what became obvious as we were going through these analyses one after another, the financial analyses, is that the first thing people want to know, the ministries want to know, is hepatitis elimination in fact cost effective? Should we go after it? And so what you see here, look at the graphs on top, and we've done this for a number of countries. So we just picked two: Cameroon as an example of a low income, middle income. And then Australia as a high income. And the black line shows what Cameroon will actually spend on total healthcare diagnosis and screening using the status quo. So very little treatment, very little screening. So most of what increase you're seeing in there in the black line is in fact the cost of healthcare, right? So there's going to be more and more individuals progress into HCC, decompensated cirrhosis, hospitalization, they need to pay for chemotherapy. And if you look at the Australia, in fact, they're on the same path, right? So it will actually increase. Now, what happens if they go after WHO elimination? Now, you need to treat more, right? And you need to screen a lot more people. But what you save is the healthcare costs. So you have fewer hospitalization, and so these are direct costs only. And what you notice is, in fact, the green line goes over the black line, but after a certain point, it actually starts crossing. After that point, the countries actually start saving money. Cumulative. This is from today forward, they start spending less than they would have otherwise. And so what this shows is whether you're talking about a low-income country or a high-income country, and we've done this in about 30 countries, in fact, elimination strategies are cost-saving. They're not even cost-effective. If you're interested in cost-effective, those are really the graphs on the bottom. And so what we have is the red line is some of the classical measures, 3 times GDP. The blue line is 1 times GDP. And you see even in a low-income country that by 2035, in fact, we do achieve cost effectiveness. And of course, in Australia, because medical expenses and diagnostic and screening are more expensive, you actually achieve cost effectiveness much faster just because of the fact that you're saving so much disease burden. So why aren't countries actually really going after the elimination targets and not really funding? And this is the reason why. So if you look at the top graph, what you look at is Cameroon. The status quo, the total number of infection is about the same, maybe slowing down. We're going to see an increase in number of liver-related death. We're going to see an increase in number of HCC cases, but the green line shows what would be the impact of elimination targets. So treating and screening more. And in fact, what you see is a very sharp drop in number of liver cancers, number of liver-related deaths, and of course, the overall total number of infections. But the reason people aren't going forward is the graph on the bottom. So I want you to look at the lower left, and the blue line shows what the Cameroonian government is going to spend on hepatitis C program over time. And so what you see is most of that is actually the cost of hospitalization. There's some discounting. We have to apply a 3% discount, so over time, the value or the cost of a procedure is a little cheaper in the future than it is today. But what I want you to look at is the green line. So what happens is if the government spends more up front, what you notice is actually the green lines, the bars actually get shorter than the blue. In fact, after they achieve elimination, their total costs will be lower. Right? So if we break that out, we look at the graph on the right, what are the components that cost? Well, the yellow shows the healthcare costs. So we will see a very sharp decrease in healthcare costs as there are fewer people with advanced liver disease, but that's offset by cost of screening. So the green bars actually show that they have to spend more on diagnostic and screening, and of course the red shows the cost of treatment and laboratory costs. So in fact, if the government Cameroon commits to it, they will spend a little more upfront, but a lot less later. So that's actually very similar to a different problem, very common problem that we've seen, and that is buying a house. All right, so how many people own a house in this audience? All right, and how many people paid cash up front? None, right? So buying a house will cost you more, but in the long term, once you own the house, it'll actually cost you less because, you know, if you're buying a house, the rent will go up every year and you never own it. But in fact, if you make the investment in about 15 years, you pay back the loan, you own the house, and you no longer have to spend. And so the way that people buy a house is they go to the bank and say, look, you know, want to take a loan, and I'll pay you back. So this is the model we actually started proposing, and in fact, it wasn't as successful as we thought it would be. So this is in reality what happens. There are actually three sets of countries, groups of countries, those who can self-fund it. So examples of that is, of course, Australia, in Brazil, Cameroon. And part of that is done through, of course, negotiation, but the healthcare system is fairly strong, and they can actually support it. So what they do is they realize that they have to spend more money up front, but they can make the justification to actually spend that and realize the cost saving. So that's one group of countries. The second group of countries, what seems to be appropriate, is a patient copay program. And that's where they actually can get access to generics. The public health system gets that and then provides it to the patients. And then they get a copay back, actually. So the government limits how much they have to spend on it. And in Mongolia is a good example. So they went with a system where the patients had a copay, and as the cost of the treatment went down, the patient's copay went down, actually, and it gets close to zero. Now, there's variation of this model, which is what if the public health system doesn't actually, they just basically sponsor the program, and then the copay is used to buy drugs and diagnostics to provide for the green people, which is the very low-income people who can't afford it all. And so that's another system. And then the last is the loan and bonds. So this is the model where you can actually, very similar to buying a house, which is you take on a loan, you pay it back. And in fact, there are organizations out there who are willing to provide no-interest loans, 2% in loans. But this is really a paradigm shift, and the countries really have a hard time adopting something like this because they don't want to go into debt. Okay, so with lower prices, we do know that countries can actually fund elimination strategies using their existing budget. So here's some countries. And what was interesting is we started looking at what's the underlying cause. So the blue boxes are really reduction in prices between 2016 and 2017 was due to competition. So we saw massive competition in Saudi Arabia, in Greece, in Taiwan, and the United States, of course. The prices now are less than 20,000. And the green is really about volume pricing. So what we saw is if you look at the graphs on the right, is all the countries on the right actually have access to generic pricing. But in fact, Egypt was able to get volume-based pricing and really drive it down even further. And one of the key messages here is if you're going to go after elimination and you're negotiating, if you can go after volume, you can even lower prices. And we saw that also in high-income countries. A country like Australia actually was able to negotiate fairly decent prices. And these are actual data that we collected. Okay, one of the things that the countries are missing is the cost of screening. And in fact, the screening is going to be a major impediment to elimination. This is a project we did for New Zealand, and right now it cost them $3,000 to find one new case. I'm running out of time. If you're interested, come up to me and I will show you that. In fact, by 2025, it's going to cost them $40,000 to find one new case. Why is that? Anti-HCV prevalence is going to stay constant. So everybody's going to test positive for anti-HCV. The percentage who will test positive for PCR is going to be substantially lower. So you're going to test everyone for anti-HCV, run PCR, and that's going to cost you a lot of money, so $40,000. The way to get around that is to get to a voucher or a registry. If you don't have a program in place, please think about it. With that system, you can drop the cost in 2025 from $40,000 to $1,500. That is a huge, huge drop, and a lot of countries are not thinking about this right now. In conclusion, national financing for hepatitis elimination can be supported through three separate mechanisms that we've seen. One is, of course, the self-funding, co-pays, and this is patient co-pays, and of course, bonds and loans. Prices will go down with volume, but a global procurement mechanism is needed to support countries with small orders. We had a number of discussions during break saying, look, my country cannot really negotiate on our own. And that's what global procurement is really required. Without a national screening strategy, the cost of screening will surpass the cost of treatment. I would guarantee you this, actually. So make sure that you look at that. And the same financing issues will be faced by other future curative therapies. As Charles mentioned in the previous discussion, we just happen to be the first one with curative therapies. So for curative Hep B, curative HIV, it's going to be the exact same problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ami. And my pleasure to introduce Mr. Washeng. Mr. Washeng Lee is president of the Seatrend Foundation, a private funded foundation based in Hong Kong. Mr. Lee has spent a lifetime career in the non-profit sector, and he focused on equity and access to quality care in underserved part of China, but a very strong support and a special interest in hepatitis. And I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the kind introduction. Good morning. Good to see everyone here. In the last few days, we've heard a lot about the needs, challenges, and the possible solutions when we try to meet the elimination goal by 2030. So it's really also time for us to think about action. So what can we do? What should we do? As a practitioner for the last 30 years or more in the philanthropy sector, we would like to think there's always a role for us in this global drive to eliminate hepatitis. So with that, and what I would like to share with you is a new initiative we just launched actually at the summit as a possible way of to, at least in some way, to meet the funding needs. Actually, I stay away from the word financing because it has particular meaning in some situations. So I'm trying to see, okay. Elimination of viral hepatitis at the philosophical, intellectual level, I don't think there's much doubt out there anymore. But how the philanthropic sector can respond and should respond. Oftentimes we look to the Gates Foundation and to look at the global funds, say what they have done, what they have achieved, and then we think, why has hepatitis not received nearly the kind of attention from the, the donor perspective. What has gone wrong, right? So I'm going to use the new project we are putting together as an example to see how the donor sector could rise to the occasion. So going back a little bit, our foundation, Zeshan Foundation, is a private family foundation. We've been working with the WHO, US CDC, and some other partners on the virus hepatitis front for close to 8-9 years. So moving forward, looking at the needs, we decided it was time to look at, back then actually we started thinking about the financing or funding for viral hepatitis. WHO was still working on the global health strategy. But we, in anticipation of that coming out, in collaboration with the WHO, US CDC, we decided to organize this international roundtable summit to look at, one, the needs, and two, how we can fund this global effort. So in a way, it is a culminating event for the partners on this. So the meeting took place in Hong Kong in June last year. A very concrete, okay, I'm going to just go quickly. As our partnership with the WHO grows, we're pro, and this is an example actually how, we were going about getting the word out, how to raise the public awareness, how to, raise the bar in the discussion. One on the right side, some people already, were talking about, looking at the prevention of liver cancer. So that's also is how we were looking at it. So the meeting actually, was co-chaired by two gentlemen, Gottfried Herschel, everybody knows very well, who has the WHO program, the HIV and the global hepatitis program, who was instrumental in helping us thinking through the agenda for the summit. The other gentleman is Dr. Ray Yip. Not everybody probably is familiar with him. He was with the Gates Foundation. Now he advises Mr. Gates on some other philanthropic and other social venture projects. So here's the organizing committee with the co-chairs. John, is John in the room? From CDC, Nick, Paho, now is with Paho, Home, and Yinglo is is now the representative, WHO representative for Malaysia, 3 countries, I believe, Singapore and I forgot the third one. And then Nicole Smith from USCDC, she's now retired. So this is the meeting was actually attended by representatives from 30 countries. It's important because what we arrived at from this summit was actually a specific action plan. This action plan was a collective wisdom and also a collective determination to do something about the situation. So what was the action plan? Is to stand up, create a dedicated fund for the elimination of viral hepatitis. So we have a vision, very simple, but lofty in a way, to say, to eliminate viral hepatitis as a major public health. So we are working, we'll be working, really for future generations, free of viral hepatitis. And our mission is really to be a catalyst. So we've heard the term catalytic funding, how to spur actions, but the approach really is looking from the public health and from the systems approach, so that we can really get to the roots of the situation and come up with the solutions. So we created, put together a steering committee from pretty diverse backgrounds. to start looking at how to create this fund. What are the things we need to do in the past 14, 15 months? Pretty intensive, but in a way we succeeded, and to create this called the Fund for Elimination of Viral Hepatitis for branding purpose, for a consistency with the overall message. We now started calling it NHEP 2030. Okay, so this will be a pretty nimble, lean organization. We're not going to be another global fund. And one of the distinct features of it is it will have limited lifespan. That means we're not going to be here forever, and it's not going to be an open-end program. So we're giving ourselves up to 25 years. So we're putting ourselves, not ourselves, actually everybody else, all in here, in it for it. And it will be primarily a grant-making program. We aim to raise $1 billion to support initiatives and programs that will really, help spur new ideas and help national governments to develop their own policies. And in a way, I like to say that we will support a lot of soft aspects of this global effort. To make it more efficient and more effective, we decided not to create a standalone organization, at least not in the initial years. Instead, we partnered with the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, a New York City-based organization, charitable organization created by the Rockefeller family to advise donors. So we think they would be perfect for us in terms of helping us become a fully operational and effective program. So we have some areas we have identified and need to be further refined, but ultimately we consider it as a collective funding platform for private and corporate philanthropy. I'm saying that it's not like to ruling out the government possibilities. They are all part of the partnership. That goes without saying. But we do want to mobilize resources from the philanthropic sector and also give donors a true sense of ownership. So here's just some areas we think we should be looking at, but we are open to suggestions and go from there. Very quickly, and I'm running out of time, and this is how it is structured. There will be an oversight committee under the RPA Board of Directors to oversee the operations of the fund, the program. The committee will be supported by an advisory council and also a business leadership council. So the business leadership council will include industry in the pharmaceutical industry, but it will go far beyond pharmaceutical industry. And then we'll have what we call the strategic partners, because it is a collective and a collaborative effort. Without partners, nothing can be truly accomplished in this. So here, this is our oversight committee. A lot of familiar names you will see here. And so to start with, the three foundations have come forward to provide initial funding. And Zeshan Foundation, my foundation, also has committed seed funding. So with the John C. Martin Foundation, where's Lilia? I cannot see with the lights. And then Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the largest health funder in the United States, on board. So we think we are off to a decent start. And our strategic partners will really, from these areas, the seed, funding donors, international hepatitis-focused organizations, international public health policy focused organizations, World Health Organization, and the regional offices and others. So this is how we think a partnership would be for us. So this is very slow. I'm going to go quick. Sorry. kind of go back. To mark the launch, we, Zeshan Foundation and the John C. Martin Foundation, we all came together and issued some inaugural grants to support related efforts. There's a press release on the website that you're welcome to look at. And so for us to achieve a no HEP, the grand goal, we need to work together. So that's what End HEP 2030 is all about. And thank you for your attention.
So let's continue the section and to talk about getting started with funding initiative. I would like to introduce Taryn Barker. She's the director of the viral hepatitis program at the Clinton Health Access Initiative, and she has led the launch of hepatitis program in 7 countries in Africa and Asia, and she has a lot of experience in supporting government in her life, professional life.
Good morning, and thank you everyone for honoring me with the opportunity to stand in front of you today and to share with you what I think about when I can't sleep at night. It's been a really exciting conference so far, and if you're like me, you're brimming with new ideas about what you want to do when you get back to the office on Monday. If you're also like me, you're wondering where the resources are going to come from to get some of these exciting and new ideas going. At the same time, I think we've all been very well challenged by Dr. Jeremy Lauer earlier today that we need to think about hepatitis in the context of how do we integrate into UHC in a way that's not only integrated, but efficient and affordable. And so what I would like to talk with you about today is a few things. First, I want you to be as excited and as believing that we can do something in the short term about getting funding in order to move us towards UHC. But I also want to talk with you about what opportunities are ripe for catalytic financing and what could potentially be some of those sources as we work towards UHC. There we go. So what is catalytic financing? And it's a term we've been throwing around a lot over the last couple days. And the way I think about it is that these are short-term, targeted investments that can stimulate an outsized sustainable impact as we work towards UHC. And so why should we be thinking about this? And first of all, I mean, at this point, we all know that few countries have yet been able to fully finance their viral hepatitis programs. We know a lot of resource mobilization to date has really targeted domestic financing for treatment, that there may not be big global donors, but that domestic financing takes quite a long time to really get fully into play. Many of us have heard at this meeting that one source of funding is not going to be enough to reach our 2030 elimination goals. And with really limited resources, figuring out where to start can be very daunting for NGOs, for governments, for everyone who's passionate about this cause. And creative deployment of catalytic funding really can jumpstart how we scale up and integrate into UHC. So when is catalytic financing appropriate? When I think about this, I like to ask a few different questions when we work with governments. One is, are there ongoing activities that the Ministries of Health could fund, but the setup costs are really what's causing the problem? Second, are there key activities, and Homi talked a little bit about this, where costs need to be incurred now, but the benefits are going to be in the future? And finally, could there be funding available, but the intervention is still a little bit risky, and people are a little bit hesitant to jump in feet first? And it's also important to be very sure that it's this initial funding that's the gap, and it's not other systemic issues that could prevent the catalytic funding from being able to turn into a sustainable impact. So for that first question, I'm going to give you just a few different examples as we go through here. This isn't exhaustive, but it's just to stimulate your creativity. One that we've seen in countries like Cameroon, for example, is the government may be willing to fund hepatitis B birth dose, but can't raise the money necessary to do all of the training of healthcare workers that they may need. This is a perfect time for where you would look for a catalytic investment, which could come from talking to a maternal health donor about a new vaccine's introduction, applying for an operational research grant and framing it as research. A second example could be where you do have a system where patients would be able to pay, but the public healthcare system doesn't have the resources today to be able to buy that first set of viral load reagents. This is something we've seen work well in Nasarawa State in Nigeria, where Mylan and Cepheid agreed to a partnership where they provided seed loan to the public system to buy that first set of viral load tests, which are now being sold to patients, and the government will be able to sustain that going forward. A second question, how do we solve that timing mismatch between costs and benefits? We've definitely heard a lot about this. There's many different modelers who've proven in country after country that costs today or if we pay today, things will be much cheaper in the future. This is an example where we could really go after bond structures, especially where the interest cost would be significantly less than the cost savings. Development impact bonds, government bonds, or even just talking to impact investors who are looking for a social return are all great options for this. Another part that we've been talking about quite a bit this week is pricing. One thing that's worked incredibly well in HIV and family planning is to look for opportunities to have volume guarantees that allow us to make investments today for cheaper pricing on the backs of someone supporting a little bit of that risk. And third, so how do we encourage investment when we don't know what works yet? And I think this is one where there's been a lot of success so far. I think a lot of the work on cost effectiveness modeling over the last few years has been able to help us see a little bit of investment in generating data can really help us demonstrate why investment in hepatitis is critical. This worked incredibly well in Pakistan, in Punjab state for getting the government to invest, in Egypt, and many other countries. A second area is anytime we have a research question that's preventing people from stepping in. Birth dose vaccination in Africa is a great example of this, where one of the reasons people haven't invested yet is because they don't know what to do about out-of-facility births. Looking for opportunities for operational research funding and innovative ideas is a fantastic way for jumpstarting something that could then be integrated into your universal healthcare system. And so the next question I want to talk about with you is how do you determine who you actually go after for sources of funding? And I've given a couple of examples for this so far, but there's two areas that I think have come up a number of times in the discussion today that I wanted to talk about in particular. Number one, where are hepatitis services incremental to other activities that have funding available? And this gets to that idea of how important it is to integrate and go towards integrated models of services. And secondly, who are new actors, and particularly private sector actors, who may have a vested interest in helping push the hepatitis agenda forward? So quickly, I also want to mention that catalytic funding can come from many different sources. Some of the domestic funding that we're talking about can be catalytic, revolving drug funds in many countries, government issuing bonds, looking at opportunities to leverage other sources, looking at catalytic ways to solve issues where patients do have to pay. Bank seed funding, low-cost services, microfinance, employer-facilitated loans, and finally, external financing sources. It's definitely a very lean environment right now for donor funding, but there are funders out there, and there is money out there. And from everything from development bank grants, academic grants, impact investors, corporate social responsibility, guarantors, all sorts of donors for related causes. We heard Dr. Saeed talk a little bit earlier about going after cancer donors, which is a growing space, maternal and neonatal health donors. So it's very important to think about who are the right actors that could be interested in a specific project. So that first question, to go back to, of how to leverage existing finance due to common causes. And many countries that we work with have done this really well. And so this is anytime we have financing that isn't dedicated to hepatitis, but we're looking at solving a similar problem. We've seen this quite often now in cases where there's been prevalence studies for HIV or bank samples sitting at labs of thousands and thousands of patients. It doesn't take a lot of incremental cost to add a little bit more screening on so we better understand the picture. And there's many different organizations that may be willing to do this. Academic partnerships, donation of some of the commodities or improved pricing, and even incremental MOH budgets can be used for such things. Another example is we see one of the biggest areas of growth in terms of the public health space right now is maternal health, sexual and reproductive health. And some of the activities, especially in hepatitis B in pediatrics, can piggyback on these activities, so that when we're already working and training and mentoring community healthcare workers on delivery wards, it doesn't take a lot more to include hepatitis B into there and to make sure those mothers are linked to care for their babies. And finally, there's a lot of new work being done on non-communicable diseases. We're seeing companies and different organizations investing in kidney disease screening campaigns in communities and targeting working age men, where we're really struggling to find patients in many countries. Looking at these opportunities where the groups that we're looking to find dovetail is a really interesting way of going about it, and it makes it significantly less expensive for everyone to invest in these integrated opportunities. And then another question is, how do we attract these new investors that may never have heard of hepatitis before or don't really know anything about this space and why it should be important to them? One that I've been thinking about quite a bit is that hepatitis B and C affect a significant portion of formal sector populations in many of the countries in which we work. And companies are willing to screen and treat their workers once they know that this is a problem. Heineken piloted this in HIV, and it's very exciting to hear that they're now doing the same for hepatitis in their programs in Burundi and Rwanda and even the DRC. And approaching these companies and demonstrating to them the value for those patients can help us get just that one little step further to all the patients we want to find. Another option is, in some cases, we've seen ministries of health be able to allocate funds for treatments, but not be able to secure the buy-in to also purchase diagnostics. There's been some interesting examples in India and elsewhere, and this doesn't work in every country with legal structures, but where partnerships with pharmaceutical companies can bundle those products together to make it easier to sell everything as a package. And of course, the final area is when the return on investment from cost savings is really clear. This is a fantastic way to attract this new growing group of investors who are interested in impact investing, who for a small portion of the cost savings, and to also get to say that they've played a part in eliminating hepatitis, may be willing to front the capital that we need to get started in exchange for that portion of future savings. It's also a place where requesting debt buybacks from governments is a potential way to reroute the money to where we would like it to go. So in conclusion, I hope I've shared with you a number of ideas, and potentially some of these are ideas that you can present to the new End Hep 2030 funds in the coming years. But really financing elimination and getting it to the point where it's really an integrated part of our universal healthcare systems is going to require a lot of creativity and hard work on the part of all of us to match the right financing to the right problems. We don't need to start big. We can start small if we start strategically and think about what that best use of every single dollar is to catalyze our biggest goals of elimination. And to do this, I won't go through this graphic, but these are just all of the different examples that we've talked about here today on how we can put together all these little sources of funding for different programs in order to really go towards our goal of integrating hepatitis C into UHC and achieving elimination of both diseases. Thank you.
We are going to change the methodology right now. No? Oh,
We
sorry.
have a speaker. We will close the panel with Dr. Eduardo Gonzalez-Pierre. Eduardo is a distinguished non-resident visiting fellow at the Center of Global Development, but you have been serving in different high positions in Mexico, and especially as Deputy Minister of Health. You will talk about one of the most difficult issues that we have to do if we want to move also is to engage with Ministry of Finance. And just before giving you the floor, in France we are saying that for finance, Minister of Finance, they are saying, explain to me what kind of money you need, and I will explain to you how you don't need extra money. But you may find a way to crack the code. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe, and I also want to thank the Alliance and WHO for the kind invitation to be here. So I'm scheduled to talk about engaging ministries of finance. It's not an easy topic. I think it's part of this reality check about how to match all these wonderful messages and news about great treatments, great rollovers, and then you have to find the monies, and how do you go about finding the money? So I have a few suggestions for you, and my suggestions are based on my experience over the past 20 years in Mexico. I've engaged in policy reform, some major reforms. Of course, most of them have to do with talking, establishing a dialogue with the ministries of finance. And it's not an easy thing, but I think it's doable. So at the end, I'll put some recommendations specifically on hepatitis plans. So let me start with this cartoon, which I found. Given that the organization was scheduled around Halloween and All Souls Day, I thought put here two spooky figures. You got death and taxes. And I thought that was John Keynes that had said there's only two certain things about life, which is taxes, and death and taxes. It was actually Benjamin Franklin that said that. But in any case, what we have here is the reaper scared about taxes. And you want to ask why is the reaper scared about taxes? So I have a suggestion, and it's because they looked at the Hep-C tool for cost effectiveness, and he looked at Romy's presentations on cost saving of hepatitis treatments, and he's scared that the taxes are going to be used for prevention and treatment of hepatitis. And that's an interesting conclusion, because that's the kind of arguments you want with the ministries of finance. You want to show them that the monies are going to end up in very cost-effective interventions. So let me talk further. And in our press presentation, we talked about the dialogue. What should the dialogue be about with the ministries of finance? And humanitarian arguments are good. We shouldn't stay away from them. But you do have to make the economic case for better health. That's important. And it is a very complex and evolving agenda. I want to point some essential readings that have shaped the landscape between this dialogue between the Ministries of Finance and the Ministries of Health. It started in 1993. This is a landmark study, the World Development Report. It is the first report that was exclusively made on health. This report supposedly is the one that convinced Bill Gates to engage in philanthropic health and philanthropic spending on health. So it is a very important landmark. And later came a few other documents. This is a 2001 report published by the Commission of Macroeconomics and Health. Note that it talks about macroeconomics, meaning the interchange, the effect of better health on macroeconomic stability. This was a Lancet Commission that joined together some very top figures, some Nobel Prizes both on medicine and on economics, and they published a set of recommendations that were very useful. And of course that was geared, it was directed to ministries of finance. Later, came the 2010 WHO report. This was a very important report. It was about financing. It was where the cube on UHC started. And it's a very important agenda upon which a lot of these messages have been building on. And after this came another Lancet series. This came in 2013, celebrating the 20th anniversary of the World Development Report. And this was also commissioned that tried to frame a new investment strategy for health. And of course, the SDGs 2015, which inserted hepatitis in the framework of targets. And most recently, this is last year, this is a very important publication that was funded by the Qatar Foundation. It's about investing in health. It was presented last year. It makes a very, very strong case of all the unaccounted benefits in terms of economic growth, which are associated to longevity and better health. It talks about the best ways to finance health and what kind of interventions should be prioritized on health. So these are essential readings. This is the kind of documents, this is the kind of messages that the economic agencies are talking with the ministries of finance. This is the kind of dialogue that should be engaged in. So, to get a dialogue started, to engage on this, you first have to understand that these are two ministries which are very different, worlds apart, different training. You have medical doctors and you have healthcare specialists on the ministries, especially low and middle income countries are mostly health professionals, and then you have economists on the other side. And of course, they have different values, they were trained different. The humanitarian dialogue is on the health side, and the efficiency side is on the right side. The kind of jargon that is used is very, very, very few overlaps. Different concept of looking at government work. Of course, one of the few things they share is that they have a common boss, so they have to work together. They don't like to work together. The ministries of finance don't like the ministries of health to ask for appointments because they know it's to ask for the monies. And they know that they have the ethical arguments that they're going to press the budget, and that's not a very comfortable thing to see. Most of the economists, we think about efficiency. There's two types of efficiencies: allocative efficiency, doing the right things, and productive efficiency, doing things right. And in economics, you do things right because the market will take care of the allocative efficiencies. That's what the markets are about. But in health, it doesn't work that way. You have to decide which type of interventions do the most good. And that's why the dialogue on the health side is allocative, and the dialogue on the Ministry of Finance is efficiency. And you have to join those two together. It's very difficult because we're talking about the health system, which is one of the most imperfect of all the markets that we have. And of course, the mandates are different. The mandates, it's healthy populations for the health ministries, and health stability, financial stability and economic growth for the economics agency. So you have to put those two together. And of course, the metrics of success are very different. On the one side, you want to reduce mortality rates, and on the other side, you want to avoid budget deficits. And both of these can counter each other. If you see better health as a way to destabilize the budget, then you run into conflict. Nevertheless, there's good news. Two opposing views of things, very few overlaps, but you can find a common agenda. And this is important because framing hepatitis plans has to do with framing the whole relationship between health and finance. It's not a one-by-one type of argument. It's not one agenda after the other. It's setting a whole framework of collaboration. And I want to set up 3 examples of what type of collaboration that can be. One of them, which is very simple, is creating fiscal space. So raising taxes is not very popular. It's a political suicide. And what ministries of finance want is for the Ministry of Health to propose them. And that's an easy one. You have the sugar taxes, you have the fat taxes, you have the tobacco taxes. So one successful way to build trust around agencies is to build the fiscal space agenda. And they appreciate that. A second one is pandemics. Ministries of Finance, economics departments, ministries of trade and industry, they're scared of pandemics. They don't understand them. And that's a way to collaborate. They know they will be very important for the investment scenario, the investment atmosphere, and they want the ministries of health to work with them. And of course, you want value-based. And this has 2 settings. Value-based, of course, means getting the most health out of the money, but it also means how do you get health to work for the economy? How do you get investments in health that would actually develop or create productivity gains Obesity is a good example. How you get investments against obesity to have a more productive working force. So those are three things, and of course hepatitis works on the last one, the value-based agenda. And let me wrap up by mentioning what could be said about hepatitis in particular after working a general working relationship with the Ministries of Finance. Number one, and it's been said a lot, you have to be convincing about the ex post. So you do the investment case. We've seen that the investment case is very, very good. It's cost saving. That means you make, doesn't cost you, and it's going to get you gains. Of course, you have the temporality of the upfront costs. But it is usually the case that theory doesn't meet with practice. It's full of examples of great cases. In theory, everything was cost saving. In practice, you get all these implementation bottlenecks. You have corruption. You have different types of inefficiencies and bottlenecks that don't work. So to be convincing about the ex ante, the investment case, you have to put together a very credible evaluation project. That's the way to argue that you'll be committed on the ex ante, but you also be doing the follow-up, and then you'll know whether it really, really worked or not. So that's missing. It's missing because it's new. But you have to put together an external agency, credible, competent, that is going to do the follow-up, and it's going to show what really worked and what really didn't work. Budget predictability. That's what the Ministries of Finance don't like. They don't want to lose control of the budget. And this is something that they can lose control. That's why the prevalence numbers are so important. It's easier for the Ministry of Finance to accept a non-cost-effective drug if it's contained to a population, but if it's a very wide base, if it's in the thousands or hundreds of thousands, even the millions, the contingencies are not clear. And what they don't want to engage in is something they cannot stop, something they cannot commit to. And that's what we need to work on. We need to work on the parameters, the maximums and minimums of the actual budget impact of rolling this out. And finally, the pressures. What Ministries of Finance don't like is the Ministries of Health working with the sources of pressures against the Ministry of Finance. They have to work together as part of government. I think it's important to sort out the pressures from industry, from all the other expectations, and make a common, coherent case. So it is the whole idea about putting together a trusting relationship, something that lasts for a long time. Again, it cannot be just about hepatitis. It has to be about the whole health agenda. And of course, hepatitis has a very good chance of competing favorably against all the other budgets if it is done coordinated across these agencies. So thank you very much and good luck.
Now we're going to change the methodology. We are going to have a debate between two presenters, and the question and answer will be in the end of the whole session. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jeremy. Jeremy is an economist and has experience working in countries in Latin America and in Africa. And more recently, he's doing he's working with health system and broader economic for the UN Secretary General High-Level Commission in Geneva.
Thank you. Are you hearing me all right?
Sorry.
I need just to introduce also the other discussant, which is the Director General of National Cancer Center in Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar, Dr. Chiburen Jesus Duren, and you have in charge not only the cure of the cancer but also the prevention. So your experience is very important. Perfect. As far as also your country had made a very important announcement during this conference about how to deal with HIV. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just in reflecting on these last two sessions, I want to acknowledge, if you like, the coherence and the convergence and the harmonization of the messages. I mean, everything that we've been hearing has been pointing in the same direction. And so we thought we could engage in a little bit of a free-flowing conversation for a few minutes to look at an experience in a particular country case where Dr. Chinbaran will share with us his experience. And I think if we're attentive, we'll find that it touches on many of the themes and the problems or even the solutions that we have touched upon in these past sessions. So without further ado, I would like to lead off with a very open-ended general question for Dr. Chinbaran, which is, in your experience, what are the factors that enable successful domestic financing for hepatitis?
Thank you for invitation to discuss the domestic funding in case of Mongolia. And of course, the major fact to convince to get the domestic funding, this is to convince the politicians to involve on this problem. So our civil societies, NGOs, and professional societies, they pushed very much since 2012 until 2016 about liver disease burden in Mongolia. So we are talking not just for hepatitis, we also talk about liver cancer. So I will just give you the number that every day we lose 7 Mongolians for liver cirrhosis and liver cancer. So this just number is very much convinced the parties, the major parties, to take our advocacy, and they put the liver problem in an election program. So this was a very good job.
So that is reminding me of one of the questions that we had earlier in the previous session, where some of the cost savings are realized on the side of non-communicable disease programs that are treating cancer, in particular liver cancer, but the hepatitis control program may usually be coming under an infectious disease type of program. So how, in the case of Mongolia, were you able to put those pieces together or was it a political solution, or was there also a discussion at the level of the disease programs, and how did that occur?
Okay, my background is a liver surgeon, and I work as a head of department of liver surgery, and the problem for liver cancer comes from the chronic hepatitis. So we know the etiology. The etiology is hepatitis B and C for progressing to the liver cancer. So all this happens during the 60s, 70s, 80s, that we didn't have any infectious control against the hepatitis among the Mongolians. So all these infections come very heterogenic way, not just the fall of the people. It's not fall of the own people. It's fall of the whole system, health system in Mongolia. So we advocate the politicians to understand that it comes from a very long time ago, and so we need to cover not just the hepatitis program as an infectious disease. We should cover the whole liver as a saving the liver, not just the protecting and cutting off the etiology. And also we should treat those people who is going to have to get the cancer. And also it's very important to make a transplantation for those patients who's ending up with the liver disease. So those reasons give us the Integrate One program is a healthy liver for Mongolians. This is occupying all the problem of liver.
Thank you. So it sounds like that logic that you're describing is very much in the frame of the investment case, cost effectiveness analysis. Did you find in your experience that those specific studies also needed to be done, or was it more at the political level that the dialogue occurred?
Well, the previous presenters, they say that technology is very important. So on a time, we were very lucky that the world technology for medicine, for it's a good, sorry. I'm sorry. So that's from the air conditioning. Okay, so we got available the treatment for hepatitis C, and we already have a vaccination, a universal vaccination against hepatitis B, and also we have a good treatment for early liver cancer, like ablation, which treat the small tumor just within 5 minutes, and that's it, and tomorrow patient go home. So all these opportunities of technology also gives a good push for this program, and we can predict the result, and we can give the good economic and cost effectiveness prediction to the political people, and it gives a good advantage to have this program.
Excellent, thank you. So maybe we can talk now a little bit about the financial aspects. Did you need to appeal to external funding to make this happen, or was it a domestic financing initiative? And maybe you want to tell us a little bit about some of the numbers and the amounts that were involved.
Okay. Sorry, don't ignore this, my coughing, and it's very shame that. Okay, I would like to talk very much, but then it's coming cough. Okay, so first of all, we try to convince the people who deciding how much money can spend for health screening from the health insurance system of Mongolia, and they agreed to spend $4 million for health screening. That was the first step to convince them to have a domestic funding. So, and from the 4 million, we need to calculate how much we need to spend for rapid test, how much we need to spend for PCR, and for early detection of liver cancer. And we need to calculate how many people we will test.
Mm-hmm.
So we had everything, because the previous scientists and civil societies made a good calculation, and we know how many people. We have a good estimation how many people having hepatitis C. We know how many people having hepatitis B, and we have a very good data register for liver cancer. So everything integrated, and we had very good numbers.
Mm-hmm.
This helps very much. So we had 4 million. From 4 million, we start to take what is the target, what is the most burdened ages for our nation. So it's easy. We calculated it's from 40 to 65. It's around 90% of all disease burden. So we take 40 to 65 age for rapid test, and it's around one test. It costs around $1.5, and we estimate around 500,000 people should go for this testing, and we have $600,000 to spend for this. And then we also have a double. We have another funding for treatment. So insurance is paying around $7 million for DA treatment.
Mm-hmm.
7 million. So our population is 3 million people, and we have around 500,000 people suffering with chronic hepatitis, and so 200,000 hepatitis C. So we gradually, step by step, can start to treat the people. And so we have two fundings. One is for health screening. Another funding is from insurance to treat the patient. So we should combine those funding and use it to solve the whole problem. And our Mongolian healthy liver for Mongolians has 3 components. One is detecting hepatitis B and C, treating and controlling. Second component is early detection of the liver cancer, and third is a free of charge liver transplant. So these 3 components. So we need to divide all this money for those. And we had a good estimation, and of course, we have some problem with the insurance people and the Ministry of Health and Minister of Finance. That the previous presenter said the Minister of Finance, they're playing very important role. So we need to have a good advocacy for them.
So interestingly, it sounds like everything was done with domestic resources, domestic funding. Were there any gaps, or are there any gaps where external resources could be useful?
Of course, the money is always short. We need more and more. But we have good enough money for 2017, and I hope in 2018 we can increase those money. We had a good discussion with the Minister of Finance. So I think with the domestic funding, we can control almost all problem for the liver in Mongolia. And for the external funding, maybe we need money for research, because we have a lot of data, and it needs to be use it for research, to find out why we have a lot of liver cancer in Mongolia compared with other countries to have same chronic hepatitis problem. And also we need good research for the result, what we have doing. This is also important. So for research, we don't have money, and we don't have a budget for this. So I think it's very good. And second is to collecting data, to integrating all this data. We are also weak on it. So I think we will have a good progress doing with the cooperative work with the insurance system, because insurance system, the unique system, they give you money. So all data flow to insurance system, so we can use this insurance system data as our main platform.
Now, I think that's very interesting, and I want to maybe highlight that point. I mean, you're saying that knowledge and data, research which generates knowledge, and data which generates information and understanding, that those are some of the funding gaps that, even though you had really a very advantageous situation in terms of your domestic funding, that there are still those areas that aren't reached. And so just to step into my economist role again briefly, those kind of products, the knowledge and data products, we'd call them public goods. And they're often not satisfactorily met by market solutions or even by domestic solutions. And I think that's an area where international donor assistance, probably to fund those public goods, knowledge production, data production, is going to be of continued relevance. So I think that's, I just want to highlight, I think that's an extremely interesting point that you make there. Now, shifting gears slightly, back to some of the themes that we've touched on earlier today, would you like to talk us through how the different perspectives between, say, in your own case, that of a liver transplant surgeon, infectious disease programs, chronic disease programs, and the health system, Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance, how are there wildly different perspectives? If so, how are they different, and how did you address that?
Okay, in my case, that I would like to highlight the presentation of the former Minister of Health of Mexico, that he said that we are doctors, we are medical people. Especially I'm not a public health person. And to having good negotiation, it's very important to have some economic knowledge. So to get the good economic knowledge, it's important to collaborate. So that I think all the parties all the people should sit together and talk, discuss the cost effectiveness, and all the ingredients should be discussed. And I just want to say that the medicine, the nowadays technology is very high. You know that just 3 years ago, we didn't have a transplant those patients who has hepatitis C, because after transplant, the patient got a very big problem, recur of the hepatitis C. That was the big problem, and it was not cost effective. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, hepatitis B is a problem, not C. Mm-hmm. So see that the technology is very fast growing, and all the medical people, public health, and economists should also follow this fast growing technology and to understand the effectiveness of this. I think this is the clue of achievement of the good negotiation.
Yeah, very interesting. So bringing back to Dr. Gonzalez-Pierre's point, it's really about engagement, starting the conversation.
Yep, and to have a good actually the party should have a good homework to have all data in the table, and then give these data and prediction, and that's a very important, I think.
Okay, so I think that concludes the questions that I had for you, and I want to thank you very much for your sharing with us your experience. So I think we can stay here and pass the floor back to our chairs to lead the Q&A discussion.
Yes, I have. Thank you very much. And I asked the panelists to stay, and happy to give the floor for the Q&A exercise. But let's think about what is the conclusion, what is the takeaway from this session this morning.
Right. Dr. Indita Shtrich from Onam Foundation in Mongolia. So I just wanted to add to my colleague Dr. Chimburin's comments. The convincing the government of Mongolia for funding the domestic funding, there were really a couple of important things. As Dr. Chimburin said, convincing the politicians. I think that's something that's been a little bit missing, and civil society patient groups is very important to push the politicians to have a political conviction and a backup. The second thing is, Ministry of Health, of course, sometimes limited in their power to push the government. You know, they have so the civil society and professional associations is very important to support the Ministry of Health and then cooperate. For the Ministry of, once you have the political conviction from, the Parliament of Mongolia, and I would like to, for instance, encourage the civil society here. Ministry of Health is one body that you talk to, but more important is actually talking to your members of Parliament. Those are the critical people, and that they will listen to you. And for the Ministry of Finance, the Onam Foundation, Mongolian Society of Hepatology, and Mongolian Gastroenterology Association, and Patient and Civil Society Council, we negotiated the funding. And the most important tool that we had was done with WHO, WIPRO. Nick Walsh actually played a very critical importance in that, and Homi Arzavi. And basically the conclusion of this was, if the government of Mongolia invests $1 in preventing, treating, screening hepatitis, it brings 22-fold, $22 in economic return. And this was a tool that we used to negotiate. And as Dr. Chimburin said, we had done the prevalence study, and I really the points that the former Vice Minister of Mexico outlined, those are very important, minimum and maximum, and we requested each year the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance allocate, and also Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare allocate approximately $30 million a year. That amounts to 100 million, 120 million, and 4 years. And with the economic argument and with this kind of predictability of the budget, and we were able to secure $100 million in funding, and there hasn't been no external funding coming to Mongolia except the technical missions from WHO. We appreciate greatly, and also involvement of CDA. So it's internal resources is, I would really like to highlight that there would not be a savior for the countries. The savior for you is your own country, your own internal resources. So you have to be really, everybody in this room, you have to, there are resources in your own country, you have to mobilize them and really try to convince your government to invest. I think that's very, very critically important. Just one quick model I would like to is value-based savings model that we are working on. I think this is something that's missing from the discussions in this forum. Thank you.
Have the floor, because is there somebody from Chile? Well, let's see. I just want also to, before giving you the floor, to ask also somebody from Mali, Fatih Sidibé, because I think we are talking about how to push the political will with the activists, and I think that it would be good to have your experience, maybe focusing also on hepatitis B. What you have learned this morning is very important, I'm sure. How you can have that takeaway and going to the country and fight for this.
Okay, thank you very much. Je vais parler en français. Donc, on a beaucoup appris. Nous pensons que nous avons beaucoup à faire dans nos pays où tout est à faire, à commencer. Donc, nous devons commencer parce que nous sommes dans un pays où presque 80% ne connaissent pas sa stérologie. Au Mali, presque 80%, même le personnel sanitaire. Donc, ça, c'est vraiment un problème. On a beaucoup appris par rapport à l'existence des méthodes rapides, telles qu'avec les téléphones. Donc, nous, on n'a pas besoin, les grands investissements là, on a besoin d'aller avec les nouvelles technologies assez simples pour faire un grand dépistage dans un premier temps, connaître la statistique du pays et ça peut amener les gens à prendre une décision. Et nous avons également besoin vraiment que la communauté internationale vienne à notre secours pour que nous, en tant que société, moi je suis malade, j'ai connu ma stérologie quand j'étais en Europe et depuis 2001 et chaque fois je partais faire transaminase, etc. Finalement j'ai dit ça va servir à quoi? Ça faisait 2-3 mois je ne partais pas. 3 ans, je ne vérifiais rien parce que je n'ai pas de produit. Et finalement, j'ai eu la chance avec Gilide, comme on dit, donc, qui ont amené 400 doses au Mali et j'en ai profité. Et après, j'ai fait le test pour voir 70 000. Donc, ce n'est pas à la portée de tout le monde. Donc, nous, pendant que les gens parlent de disséminer, nous, on a besoin d'abord de connaître le diagnostic. C'est le véritable problème des pays comme le Mali. Donc, nous comptons. Hier, j'ai interpellé CDC. J'ai dit qu'ils s'investissent beaucoup plus dans le palu, la tuberculose. Il y a des programmes nationaux. Bon, c'est vrai, il y a la planification stratégique qui est en cours. On nous a appelés en tant que société civile SOS Hépatite. On a tenu quelques ateliers pour avoir un plan d'action. C'est maintenant qu'on commence à faire ça. Donc, vraiment, ce n'est pas les grands montants qui nous... On veut les technologies nouvelles, accompagner. J'ai beaucoup aimé l'idée du package où on peut faire et le dépistage et donner aussi les médicaments appropriés. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Hi,
Please.
thank you. My name is Emily Hirio. I'm from Project Inform and the California Hepatitis Alliance in San Francisco, California, in the United States. Earlier this week, the Clinton Foundation co-hosted a summit on the opioid crisis in the United States in collaboration with Johns Hopkins. And given the rise in Hep C incidence among people under 30 in the United States, as well as some notable Hep B outbreaks among people who inject drugs, I was shocked to hear that the word hepatitis wasn't uttered once at that opioid summit. And so I'm just hoping the representative from the Clinton Foundation can go back to her colleagues and share this, that we're expecting leadership from the Clinton Foundation, both internationally and domestically, and that viral hepatitis needs to be mentioned in the US when we're talking about the opioid crisis. Thank you.
Somebody else? So maybe, well, you are going to have lunch, I suspect, but I just want to highlight 2-3 things. And I think it was really important session this morning. I think they were really comprehensive. And for me, if you make the connection with what I've been said this morning at the beginning, so we need to have a plan in terms of what we want to achieve. We want to have the political will, and the only way to do it is to push with the civil society. But it's not sufficient. You need to have a plan and have in mind, and maybe it's also your experience, but in my country, I mean, the ministers are changing every 2 years. So, of course, the plan needs to be longer than 2 years, but you need also to find a way to, let's say, show the progress. Because a minister wants to show the progress. He wants to say, in his term, what have changed. And I think that it's a way also to build programs, not only for hepatitis, but for all the programs. And I think it's very important in the dialogue you mentioned, not only with the Minister of Health, but also the Minister of Finance. I think that it's important also to be bold and to say there is maybe some kind of upfront loading, because if you have a program and then 2 years after with maybe a new minister that you don't show any evidence of this is moving, there is a high chance that it may come down. So it's a practical way to think also. I think that the different experience or project from my colleagues to say you need to think about who is ready to pay. Is it insurance system, the people? I mean, everything, there is no magic. There are a toolbox, there is a toolbox, but there is not a magic solution. You need to see, when you are thinking about the financing, to see what is available, not to maybe chase all of the things, to have a plan, but there is no one-way solution, I think. And the last comment I want to make, because I think that it was a comment also from some of the speakers, is of course you have to fight for the hepatitis, but it has to be part of the plan. And on health, the fact that, and you may also, thinking about efficiency, you may and you should think about how to build a plan based on, let's say, what you are doing already for HIV. I mean, if you are serious about harm reduction, you will not have to build a plan for harm reduction with hepatitis C, but a harm reduction for the one who are using drugs. Anyway, so I think you see the point. I think it's inspiring. I will let my co-chair to conclude. Maybe there is a last question, yes. Maybe?
Yes, thank you. I'm Dr. Alioune Badara Coulibaly. I'm from Mali too, just like the lady just passed. I really would like to thank all the panelists today for this so interesting question. We have a saying in our country, actually. They said, everything is set up except the money problem. Actually, nothing has started. This is just common in our country. And just like they were saying, domestic investment is actually quite a problem. It's not like people most of the time don't want to get involved. They do. But we really have so many problems since the setting up. Just like Ms. Fatmata said, we have, since the beginning, we are just worrying about those tests we have, what is the real quality of these? These are big problems we're having. And most of the time, people even don't, just like the presenter of Center of Development said, most of the time, it's just between the factories giving and to the patient having stuff, there is so many prices and it's so different. And most of the time, we don't even know what's good or not. Somebody can get tested, they say it's not positive, he gets somewhere else. All these, I think it would be interesting to have a way, internationally, all around the world, what are greater tests can be evaluated and be applied, and so everybody can use it to make sure that this person is positive. Yes, it is. It is not. No, it is. I think those processes in the beginning are big issues as well, because it's not like it's the ground zero, actually. People are trying to do a lot of stuff. It's still on a low, small scales way, but it's growing up. We have actually in our country now the health insurance starting up, and we are trying to discuss with them how to get those medicine. We didn't even have those tenofovir and other treatment. As of July, last July, we have the opportunity to have delivery through our national pharmacy company, the national pharmacy delivery company, to have tenofovir available in the country. This is a wonderful thing. I think there is people trying to do stuff. It's not much, but it would be really interesting if the funding can be set up on the first step, how to build up situation, how to make it great product. This kind of beginning might help a lot, so that people can intervene even without the government, of course. Government is gonna need to have some input, and it would be even greater for you, international offices, to get involved so that the price can get lower. I think even if people not getting money right away from the country, if there is a system which can make things easier on everybody, that would much be better. Thanks a lot, and we really hope with this 10-year strategy with hepatitis, things are really going fast. This is wonderful. It was not like there. If we think about back 60s when hepatitis B was discovered to today, you can see how we've been along for time. So thanks to everybody for this hard working, tremendous work, and I think we need to keep it up. Yes, social civility to keep it up, but please help us so that we can convince our government with much better ideas so they can much evolve without being scared and either without being just like seeing us as stupid. Thank you very much, and
Thank
great
you. Thank you. And I think your speech reached the goal of this summit, is to say to the countries, don't be blocked by the financial problems. Knock in all the doors, not only in the Minister of Health, but other doors that exist in the country to put viral hepatitis in the government agenda. So have a good lunch, and we are closing this section.
Thank you so much.